All right, well, let's jump right into one of the biggest questions out there. Can scientific truth, the stuff built on hard evidence and observation, ever really see eye to eye with the religious belief, which is rooted in faith and meaning? This is, without a doubt, one of the most fascinating and long-running debates in human history. It's a story full of conflict, sure, but also surprising moments of harmony. So we're going to unpack the whole thing right here. You can't really get this debate without looking at the history, because it hasn't just been a polite discussion. It has exploded into major society-shifting conflicts. I mean, think about it. Back in 1633, you have the whole Galileo affair, where he was condemned for saying the Earth revolves around the sun, a huge challenge to the Church's view of the cosmos. Fast forward to 1859, Darwin drops Origin of Species, and suddenly the idea of evolution calls literal creation stories into question. And then it all boils over in the US with the Scopes monkey trial in 1925, a massive public spectacle over whether evolution could even be taught in schools. These moments really set the stage for everything we talk about today.
Okay, so before we can even ask if they can get along, we have to be really clear on what we're even talking about. Because science and religion aren't just two different sets of answers. They are fundamentally different ways of approaching reality, like two completely different toolkits for making sense of the world.
And this slide really lays out what's in those toolkits. Science is all about the how. How do stars form? How do cells divide? It demands empirical, testable evidence. But here's the absolute key difference. Scientific truth is provisional. It's designed to change and get better when new evidence comes along. Religion, on the other hand, is usually asking, why? Why are we here? What's our purpose? And its truths are often seen as absolute and eternal. One is always evolving its understanding. The other is searching for timeless meaning.
Given how fundamentally different they are, it kind of boils down to this one huge question. Are these two ways of knowing just destined to be at odds forever? I mean, do you have to pick a side? Well, let's explore that first. Let's dive into the case for conflict. The argument that says, yes, absolutely, you have to choose. This view holds that the differences aren't just on the surface. They represent a deep, irreconcilable clash of worldviews. So where does all this friction actually come from? Well, at its core, it's a clash over the fundamental rules of reality. Science operates on the principle that everything has a natural, testable explanation. But many religions are built on the idea of the supernatural, of miracles, of divine intervention that, by definition, works outside of those natural laws. So when one side says, show me the data, and the other side says, you just have to have faith, they're not just disagreeing. They're playing two completely different games with completely different rulebooks. But wait, that's just one side of the story. What if this epic clash isn't inevitable at all? This brings us to the case for harmony, the view held by many scientists and theologians who argue that not only is coexistence possible, it can actually be incredibly enriching. This whole idea is just perfectly summed up by the famous paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould. He basically argued that science and religion aren't at war because they aren't even fighting on the same battlefield. They're like two separate kingdoms, each ruling over its own domain. Gould gave this idea a name, non-overlapping Magisteria, or NOMA for short. The concept is simple, but it's really powerful. Think of it like this. Science has authority over the empirical world, the facts, the data, the how. Religion holds authority over the realm of meaning, morality, and purpose, the why. According to NOMA, conflict only sparks when one side tries to make pronouncements in the other's territory, like when religion tries to dictate scientific facts, or when science tries to claim that questions of morality are meaningless. And you can really see this idea of harmony at work in a bunch of different ways. Take theistic evolution, for example. The belief held by many that evolution isn't a contradiction of God, but the very tool God used to create. For so many people, the discoveries of science, the mind-boggling scale of the universe, the incredible complexity of a single cell, don't shrink their faith. They feed it, creating this profound sense of awe and wonder. They can actually nourish each other, especially when they find common ground on big ethical challenges, like our shared responsibility to take care of the planet. So, okay, we've got conflict on one side, harmony on the other. Where does that leave us? Well, the real path forward probably isn't about picking a winner. It's about finding a smarter, more nuanced way for these two massive parts of human experience to talk to each other. So, what would a better conversation actually look like? Well, you could build it on a few key ideas. First, we all need to do our homework, right? Encourage literacy on both sides so scientists appreciate the kinds of questions theology asks and religious people understand the scientific method. Second, and this is huge,
is acknowledging the limits. Science is not equipped to tell you the meaning of life, and religion should not be used as a science textbook. And finally, we should focus on where our values overlap so we can work together on the really big problems facing all of us.
In the end, what this all really points to is that the goal probably isn't a full reconciliation, not in the sense of a complete merger anyway. If you try to force one into the box of the other, you just diminish both. The more valuable, more realistic goal might just be mutual respect, recognizing that science and religion offer two different but maybe equally essential ways of looking at reality.
And that leaves us with one last thing to chew on. Maybe we've been framing this whole debate the wrong way. What if the point isn't to force these two great human endeavors to finally agree on everything, but simply to get them, and maybe all of us, to just listen to each other a little more carefully?